The Abraham Accords were a series of bilateral agreements normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab states that once forced war relations with the Jewish state.
Signed under the auspices of former United States President Donald Trump, the accords were signed between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and between Israel and Bahrain on September 15, 2021. Morocco would later join the accords.
The agreements didn't come out of a vacuum. They were the culmination of nearly 15 years of mostly tacit relationships and long conversations between key officials of the various countries. These conversations were mature, multifaceted, wide-ranging, and focused on common strategic concerns and regional threats.
However, over the years, especially after the Palestinian attack on southern Israel on October 7th, and Israel's response, concerns over the Abraham Accords fracturing have emerged as relations between Israel and its Arab partners have grown tense and tourism and trade experiencing modest decreases.
You're listening to Strategic Wisdom with Andrew Jose. Strategic Wisdom is a foreign affairs and politics podcast brought to you by Andrew Jose, a Washington, D.C.-based security policy analyst and news reporter, bringing you timely commentary on issues in international relations, war, and security policy.
We're your presenters, Gabrielle Safchuk
and Ian Stormfeld.
What is the future of the Abraham Accords after October 7th? Will it rupture, or will it continue and expand? How will a future Trump administration, should Trump, the Republican nominee for the November 2024 presidential elections, win, affect the Accords and its prospects?
To answer these questions, joining Andrew today is Aryeh Lightstone, one of the architects of the Abraham Accords. Aryeh is also the author of the book, Let My People Know, the incredible story of Middle East peace and what lies ahead.
Without further ado, we're going to hand the floor over to Andrew Jose.
Aryeh Lightstone served as senior advisor to U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman from 2017 to 2021. He played a critical role in advancing bilateral U.S.-Israel relations with a focus on 5G implementation, infrastructure expansion, and economic development. Furthermore, Aryeh was instrumental in facilitating the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, as well as its successful merger with the Jerusalem Consulate. He led the inaugural Abraham Accord Business Summit, directed the Abraham Fund, and was the point person in the Middle East for the actualization of the Abraham Accords. Aryeh Lightstone, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're over 3 years in from the signing of the Abraham Accords. As someone who played a crucial role in the implementation of the Abraham Accords, could you share some insights on the behind-the-scenes negotiations that led to this monumental accords? What were the key challenges and breakthroughs you say that existed during these discussions and negotiations?
We're actually going to achieve the 4-year anniversary of them this August and September, depending on where you measure from. August 13th, 2020 was the first phone call that took place in between the leader of UAE, the leader of Israel, hosted by President Trump. And September 15th was the monumental signing ceremony in Washington, D.C. with the foreign minister of Bahrain, the foreign minister of the UAE, the prime minister of Israel, again hosted by the president of the United States of America, Donald Trump. So what's remarkable about all that, and I think we'll have time to talk about where it is and where it's going, in order to get there, in order for that August 13th phone call to happen, in order for that September 15th signing ceremony to occur, the United States of America took a different approach under President Trump than it had taken before. And if you remember, we are 5 years from the anniversary of John Kerry saying in December of 2016 that could there ever be normalization between Israel and any other Arab countries without a full peace with the Palestinian, he responded no, no, and no. And he responded because up to that point in time, that had been U.S. policy. And it's important just to understand, U.S. policy was that the Middle East will remain the confusing and complicated place for the United States of America until Israel and the Palestinians make a final and lasting peace. And therefore, all efforts of the U.S. foreign policy were based upon this elusive two-state solution. If you track the amount of trips that John Kerry as Secretary of State and as negotiator made to Israel and the Palestinian Authority areas over his time as Secretary of State, it's arguable he was in Israel more than he was in the United States of America. And I don't say that tongue-in-cheek. I say that for the listeners to understand that all of the focus was on this grandiose deal. And when President Trump came into office and he hired Jared Kushner and David Friedman to conduct Middle East policy, they looked at it differently. David's job, Ambassador Friedman's job, was to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship. And Jared Kushner's job was to look at the region as a whole and to see what opportunities could be taken from that. And what was fascinating was both of these opportunities were able to take place in parallel. If you remember, under Ambassador Friedman's leadership with President Trump's direction, there was the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. There was the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem. There was the recognition of the Golan Heights. There was the Peace to Prosperity workshop, and there was the deal of the century that all came out. And all of those actions happened at the same time where Jared Kushner was traveling the rest of the region, trying to find out what was happening in Saudi, what was happening in UAE, what was happening in Bahrain, Morocco, et cetera, et cetera. And what was unbelievable about that was that President Trump gave the direction to his team that said, find out what works for those countries and let's see how we can establish a better relationship with them. And the key component from that was two things at once. Number one is the moderate Arab states were looking for a consistent relationship with the United States of America against the malfeasance caused by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Israel was looking to know that they were truly America's number one ally in the region. And if both of those things could be true at the same time, that meant that the path to Washington, D.C. went through Jerusalem. And that meant that for the moderate states in the region, that in the UAE's best interest, in Bahrain's best interest, in Morocco's best interest, it made more sense to make peace with Israel, to normalize with Israel, than to wait for a deal with the Palestinians that was likely never to come. I know that was a long answer, but I wanted just to give the appropriate context.
How would you say the arrival of the Biden administration affect the Accords for the better or for the worse? In 2021, in the New York Post, the Post editorial board wrote that the Biden administration was even forbidding at the time, according to the New York Post, the mention of the name Abraham Accords, with senior State Department spokesmen and officials referring to them as, quote, normalization agreements. And even a former Trump official told the New York Post that a friend of theirs in the Energy Department was also instructed to using the term normalization agreements. So has the Biden administration taking over affected the Accords in a negative or a positive way?
When you're not willing to call the Accords by their name, you clearly are not supportive of the Accords. In fact, when Ned Price, the spokesperson for the State Department, was asked by Matt Lee in May of 2021, what do you call these agreements that the previous administration negotiated? Ned Price, the spokesperson, the voice of the United States of America, twisted himself into a pretzel so as not to say the words Abraham Accords. And I sat down that night and I wrote a book called Let My People Know. And the concept of the book is, hey guys, there's peace happening in the Middle East, but the United States of America, who brokered these peace agreements, won't even tell you about it because of politics and personality, not because of policy. So the Biden administration on day number one, back all over the Abraham Accords, not calling it their name, not supporting the alliances, not standing with Israel. And at the same time of doing that, they immediately had outreach to Iran. And so all of the things that the Trump administration had brought to the table, which is we stand unequivocally and always with Israel, we stand always and unequivocally against the Islamic Republic of Iran as long as they are participating in the state sponsor of terrorism. and we will support the moderate Arab states to come closer to us and further from China. All of those things were baked into the recipe of how to build the Abraham Accords. And President Biden shows up and says, nah, let's see if we can bring Iran back into the fold, and let's see if we can create daylight in between us and Israel. And that delivers the Middle East we have now seen over the course of the last 4 years.
How do you think Kamala Harris potentially becoming president in November would affect the course of the Abraham Accords? In Kamala Harris's recent statement after her meeting with Netanyahu, we see a sort of slight contempt, as some observers would point out, in her approach towards Israel, in the way she talked about the Palestinians, that some say was her backhandedly pointing fingers at Israel. How do you think that her presidency and her administration, with a lot of current Biden administration officials being replaced with picks of Kamala Harris, affect the Abraham Accords?
I describe the Trump administration as the administration that created peace in the Middle East. I describe the Biden administration as the administration that squandered the opportunity to expand that across the rest of the Middle East. President Harris administration will likely leave the Middle East in far worse shape than she would possibly inherit it for three very clear reasons. Number one is she has shown by boycotting Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, by the clear words that she gives credence to the pro-Hamas protesters on U.S. campuses, and by the calls for ceasefire without any context to how the war began and how the war must end. Essentially, her calls for ceasefire are a demand that Hamas remain in power. But when you look at all of those things, that is a recipe for an America last policy, and an America last policy will hurt all of our allies. So that means that Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Saudi Arabia will all fall from the position of having strong U.S. relationships, and the Iranian, the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis will all progress meaningfully under a Harris administration.
Moving away from the Biden administration, prior to the shocking Hamas attack on October 7th, what challenges would you say the Abraham Accords was facing in the lead up to October 7th? Would you say there was some sort of Abraham Accords fatigue?
No, I would say the exact opposite. Why did the momentum that was behind the Abraham Accords slow down or even stop? And the answer is they did not stop. The trade and the economic connectivity in between Israel and the 5 countries that they normalize with have grown year over year, double-digit growth, which is very, very. What has slowed down was what I would call both big projects as well as the public sense of warmth. And the reason for that had nothing to do with October 7th, because you're asking me about October 6th. The reason for that is with all new relationships, those relationships need to be guided and enhanced and nurtured and progressed. And those relationships are going to be guided, enhanced, nurtured, and progressed by the United States of America, because it was our responsibility for putting these relationships together. It remains our responsibility to be able to grow these relationships to their fruition. When the Biden administration originally ignored the Abraham Accords and then later introduced this concept of the N7, what the N7 did was it put the Palestinians smack back in the middle of the Abraham Accords. And for the Palestinians, without any prerequisites of you need to join these opportunities by reforming your judicial system, by changing your laws against paying people to kill Jews and Israelis and other Westerners, basic stuff that we would expect from any other participant in any other conference that we would have, by introducing them to the middle of the flow, not only introducing them, by requiring that they would be a component of everything that was happening. Most of the countries involved with the Abraham Accords and said, here we go again. The veto that the Palestinians had, which was removed by the Abraham Accords, has been reintroduced by the Biden administration, much to the chagrin of all of the Abraham Accord countries.
The October 7th attack by Hamas resulted in the death of 1,200 people in Israel. Understandably, Israel responded with crushing force in a protracted war with Hamas that as of August 7th is in its 10th month. How do you think October 7th has affected the dynamics of the Abraham Accords? Did it change the perception or stance of any of the signatory countries towards the Accords? And what are the challenges that the U.S. and Israel should overcome in revitalizing the Accords after or even during the current war?
I want to begin by giving credit to the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco for remaining strong in the Abraham Accords against overwhelming pressure by their fellow Arab countries and in some cases by their citizens. Just to paint the appropriate picture, in the United States of America, which is the most pro-Israel country outside of Israel, the studies have shown that around 80% of the information, both mainstream media and social media, is negative towards Israel, with about 20% neutral or positive. If you now take that to the Middle East, the Arabic-speaking countries of the Middle East and North Africa, that comes closer to 99%, and some countries even 100% negative, with nothing neutral and nothing pro. And within all of that, for a sustained period of time, as you said, over 10 months, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, and the Moroccans have maintained, and the Kosovars, as well, in Kosovo, have maintained the Abraham Accords and tried to use that in the best possible way, both to enhance their relationships with Israel, but also to be able to provide benefit to the Palestinians in Gaza. One of the greatest examples of that is the Emirati hospital in Gaza, but works in coordination with both the United States of America and the State of Israel. It's brought enormous comfort and aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who need it. So that's number one. I give credit for that. Number two is we have to acknowledge how hard it's been for those leaders over this 10 months, because when your people only hear negative things, so what's the positive aspect of the peace treaties that they signed? And number three is one of the ideas about Israel was that they were invincible. Anything you can throw out, they can shoot missiles out of the sky. They can tap into people's phones halfway across the world. With the entire region trying to destroy Israel time after time after time, Israel has not only survived, but it's thrived. And part of that made it such an attractive partner in the Abraham Accords. And on October 7th, that was weakened meaningfully. The mystique about Israeli superiority went out the window when not only over 1,200 people were raped, murdered, and massacred, but 250 people were kidnapped into Gaza. And 10 months later, there's still at least 100 alive and dead Israelis who are still in Gaza. And that is the concept or the myth of Israeli invincibility. That will take some time to overcome. But the most important part about all of this is that in this war, which has to do with Hamas perpetrating the single worst massacre against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, since the depths of the Holocaust, Israel's number one ally, the United States of America, has not had, from its administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has not stood 100% with Israel. And the rest of the allies around the region, especially the Abraham Accord allies, have come to two conclusions, I believe. Number one is, if America isn't going to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, I can't stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, meaning the ceiling for pro-Israel support is whatever the United States of America gives. But the second realization that they've come to is, if America isn't going to stand with Israel in this, could we really rely on America to stand with us if we need it? Meaning, in the most moral circumstance that you can imagine, on October 7th, the ability to go ahead and to free their own citizens and to get rid of the cancerous terror organization on its own border, the United States of America can't support that. Would they really support the Emiratis if they had an issue? Would the U.S. really support Bahrain? Would we really support Morocco if they were in a shooting war with Algeria? Would we really do that when push comes to shove? And all of that pierces the concept of the Abraham Accords, which includes the United States of America, and relying on the United States of America to be not only a voice of clarity, but also a security blanket for all of the countries involved.
questions about the U.S.'s willingness to assist its partners in times of crisis in the Middle East has often, as we have seen, led the United Arab Emirates and a few other Gulf countries to normalize with Iran. From this, I have two questions. How do you think Tehran's normalization with Gulf countries affect the prospects of a joint Abraham alliance against Iran? And how do you assess the conventional wisdom in Washington on pivoting towards Asia at the expense of West Asia? One thing we observe is that the more Washington is trying to move away from West Asia towards Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, we are seeing China have a greater footprint in the Middle East. So do you think that to some extent it is not a good idea to fully pivot away to Asia? And along with that, the previous question as well, how do you think Tehran's normalization with Gulf countries affect any joint action prospects?
With the United States of America being an unreliable ally in the Middle East, what choice does the United Arab Emirates have? What choice does the Kingdom of Bahrain have? They are not going to fight Iran or stand up to Iran or be protected from Iran on their own. And the United States of America, under the Biden-Harris administration, has shown not only no interest in isolating Iran, it's done the exact opposite. It has leveled up Iran and diminished our relationship with the Emiratis, with the Bahrainis, with the Saudis, with the State of Israel. And so those countries have to make a choice. Are they going to create this scenario on their own, which they're not going to, or are they going to go ahead and deal with the Iranians in a way that they best possibly can, which would be as peaceful and as careful as they possibly can? And that's been the pursuit that they made. To connect question number one with question number two, the most clear example of Chinese influence in the Middle East or in Western Asia, as you so appropriately describe it, there were 5 peace deals negotiated by President Trump in 123 days for the Abraham Accords. In the last nearly 4 years, there's been only one peace deal that's been negotiated in the Middle East, and that was in between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and that was brokered by China, not by the United States of America. The Saudis have said that they will trade petrol not in dollars. The United States of America has retreated from the region, and the Chinese have seen this as a golden opportunity to expand its sphere of influence, and not only expand its sphere of influence, but to hurt the United States of America in a meaningful way. The Chinese have developed a relationship, China, Russia, Iran, that causes problems in Ukraine, that is causing problems in Israel. It will cause problems in Southeast Asia. And the Biden-Harris policy of appeasement has only brought more adventurism from these bad actors, including up to just this week, fighter jets or bombers from Russia and China flying in Alaskan airspace. In my lifetime, I've never seen a weaker, more feckless U.S. administration. And it's not just the Abraham Accord countries that are hurting, it's the entire rest of the world. Now, here's the advantage. The advantage is that the United States of America is still the world's greatest superpower. If it chooses to put the Abraham Accord countries and build an Abraham alliance, like Prime Minister Netanyahu discussed, which should happen, could happen, was going to happen in a Trump second term, then that actually enables the U.S. to shift its focus to Eastern Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, because the Abraham alliance will be able to maintain full security control over the critical region of the Persian Gulf on their own. So this is yet again another misstep by the Biden-Harris administration.
Mm-hmm. Moving away from the Abraham Accords and talking about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, one of the positions the U.S. has somewhat been consistent on is propping up the Palestinian Authority. However, we've seen that the Palestinian Authority, aside from its long-held practice of sending money to terrorist groups, has recently signed an agreement with Hamas in Beijing, where both groups, Fatah and Hamas, agreed that they would work together in any future Palestinian government. How disastrous would you say has the US's position on propping up the Palestinian Authority been, both for the United States' vision for peace in the Middle East and also Israel's security, as we see the Palestinian Authority use its privileged position to undermine Israeli security with this sort of legal green light from Washington and the rest of the Western world?
The U.S. relationship with the Palestinian Authority and the two-state solution in general has been wrong for 40 years, with the exception of 4 years of Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, David Friedman, Mike. And the reason why it's been wrong is because it got up on the wrong foot. If you can imagine today, if you drive through Judea and Samaria, you'll approach parts of the Palestinian Authority. And the sign that it says before you approach those territories is Jews and Israelis should not enter for fear of death. And the concept that America would support the establishment of territories or a governing entity or even a state that on its foundation would be built specifically to keep out Jews and Israelis is so fundamentally flawed. Can you imagine replacing the word Jews or Israelis with any other minority and the United States of America considering them a true partner for peace in a region? We're going to build a country that won't allow white people, and allow black people, that won't allow Asian people, that won't allow gay people, that won't. Can you imagine saying any of those words and the United States of America being supportive of that? I mean, it's insane when you say it out loud, but we allow these exceptions for Israel time and time again. President Trump came into office and said, this doesn't make any sense. Let's, instead of lower the bar and expectations for everybody else, we plug tens of billions of dollars into the Palestinian Authority and this concept called the two-state solution without any return. Let's, instead of giving them more, let's expect more, let's demand more and see if they can rise to the occasion. And the answer is the current group cannot rise to the occasion because they've got the greatest boondoggle in the history of boondoggles. I don't know how many people have stopped to see that the leadership of Hamas's net worth sitting in a beautiful hotel in Qatar is north of $10 billion. Where did those $10 billion come from? Are they computer programmers? Did they start Google? Maybe they're great venture capitalists. Maybe there's a lot of natural resources in Gaza that they've been farming and taxed. No, of course not. They steal. They steal from their people and they steal from the international community, and they do it without any shame. Without any shame. It is one large mafia business. And until we call them out for being a large family crime ring, then their behavior will never change. And this is what the flaw has been with the United States of America. It's always been, if we just give them this one more thing, then they'll moderate. We just do this one more thing, then they'll change. And the answer is no. Giving them this one more thing is classic appeasement. What you're looking at is, over the last 40 years, the United States of America has been governed by those who follow Neville Chamberlain. Peace in our time is what he proclaims, but leading to tragedy and war. And for 4 years, we had Churchill. For 4 years, we had Trump. And that actually brought us peace, even though people all claim that he was a warmonger.
Regarding the Palestinian Authority, one individual some people have pointed out as being a promising candidate to revitalize the organization and also take care of the post-war situation in Gaza is Mohammed Dahlan, who was the former Fatah leader in Gaza and who currently is a refugee in the United Arab Emirates. What would your bet on Mohammed Dahlan be for the United States and Israel working with him as a partner? Do you think he's a promising candidate, or do you think that we still need to know more before relying on Mohammed Dahlan?
I choose not to rely on one name versus another name. I think you have to talk about the culture. And the culture has to be a broad buy-in to, look, the Palestinians need to make a decision. Do they want to look like Singapore or Dubai or Jeddah? Or do they want to look like the way Gaza City and Khan Yunis look today? And that's fully up to them. But you can't build Dubai or Jeddah or Singapore if you take all of the money that's been given to you to build terror and to use it to be able to deal for your leaders to live in fancy hotels in Qatar, or to go ahead and run drug empires across South America, and that isn't how you become Dubai or Singapore or Jeddah. You can do that when you decide that you want to teach your kids to be computer programmers and real estate moguls and not martyrs for the sake of murdering Israelis and Jews. And that won't be determined by Dahlan or by any other single individual. It will need to happen when the Palestinian people decide that there's a better way for them. And there will be important leadership for that. And it could be, again, I don't want to name names. I think it's a misnomer. The West is always like, if I only had this person, then I would be able to do something. We're working on at least 40 years and much more likely closer to 80 years of the inculcation of such complete and total hatred and value towards terrorism and destruction that it's going to take a lot more than one person to be able to turn this around. But at the same time, I remain optimistic that it's doable. I truly do.
How would you say idealism has harmed U.S. interests in the Middle East? For example, we've seen with the rise of Hamas, part of why the organization rose was as early as the Bush administration, the United States was pushing for democratic reforms without considering the implications. And as a result, you see Hamas taking power in the Middle East. And then also with Yemen, we see for a long while, Democrats condemned Saudi Arabia for its military action against the Houthis. But then what we see is that the Houthis, because they were not eliminated enough, now are having significant capability to hinder shipping through the Bab el-Mandab Strait. How would you say this sort of idealism, rather than consideration of practical regional realities, has harmed the U.S.'s interests in the Middle East and also with regards to the Israel-Palestinian conflict?
For all of your listeners who live in cities where they defunded the police and replaced them with social workers, you can decide with firsthand knowledge what it means to be idealistic versus realist. And we could hope and we could pray that every country will decide to have a democracy like the United States of America, like Israel, like the United Kingdom, etc. And we could wind up with policies that have yielded us the Middle East that we've experienced over the last 3.5 years, which is, if I wish hard enough, things will come true the way I want them to come true, as opposed to realistically, what am I going to wind up doing? But I don't know why this is not the first thing that anybody mentions about the Houthis. The Biden administration took them off the foreign terror list on the first day. What have the Houthis done to indicate to anybody that they don't belong on the terror list? Of course they belong on the terror list. They are actual terrorists, and they tell you that they are terrorists. So in whose interest is it to take them off the terror list? The same thing with Iran. In what world do we need to lessen our sanctions and to bring them back to the table? They tell you what they want to do. They chant death to Israel, and anybody who listens to the speech for long enough, it's another 3 seconds, they say death to America right after. In what way do those groups require us to be able to wish that, my goodness, if we just do one more lovely thing with them, they're going to turn around and they're going to love America? It doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. And you see this time and time again with democratic policies. It's a possibility in the universities. These make sense amongst other university professors and presidents. But in the real world, of people who've had actual jobs and are responsible for actual deliverables, none of this works. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why the Trump team was so successful. None of them were professional diplomats. And when they were told what professional diplomats do, they well, maybe it works differently in the diplomatic world. And it turns out it doesn't. It doesn't. The laws of the world still apply, just apparently nobody taught the State Department.
One thing that is clear from the Biden administration's disastrous 4 years in office is that if President Trump wins in November 2024, there's going to be a lot of housekeeping to do to clean up many of the things that came as a result of the Biden administration. As such, what challenges do you think await the Trump administration in the U.S.'s relationships with first Saudi Arabia and in general the Arab Gulf states? What are the things that the Biden administration messed up or neglected that President Trump has to fix and do differently when he takes office? So if you were to set out a list for President Trump where you lay out the things to do in an order of priority, what would your list look like, Aryeh?
Thank you for that question. It's a long list, but I'll give you sort of the highlights because they're not hard things to do. You just need to do them. The first thing is you need to immediately put back all of the sanctions on Iran at the highest capacity possible. And then you need to call our allies in Europe that have seen what's happened with Ukraine and how Ukraine is limited in their response because of the Russian nuclear umbrella. And you need to articulate to Germany and to France and to UK that we're expecting incredibly harsh sanctions by them against Iran as well. And then we message to China, who's been the escape valve for Iran. I want you to stop being an escape valve. That all happened in the first several minutes of a presidential administration. And then the president should invite the president of the United Arab Emirates and the King of Bahrain and the King of Morocco to Washington, D.C., or at least to a virtual meeting, and to thank them for their leadership. They made peace without any preconditions or with minimal preconditions 4 years prior. They were able to maintain that peace through a very challenging year in the Middle East from October 7th until President Trump's new term begins. And they should be commended and they should be thanked. And the president says, we look forward to building a new Middle East with you. And the president's going to invite the prime minister of Israel, whoever he or she may be, to the Oval Office for a sit down. And he will explain to the American people and to the rest of the world that Israel is our greatest ally in the region. And we are going to build this Abrahamic alliance. We are going to expand the Abraham Accords, not because it's good for Israel, which it is, not because it's good for our moderate Arab allies in the region, which it is, but because it's in America's best interest. When people want to know, does America stand for something? Will we stand with our allies? Will we support them? Will we help them work together? Then absolutely that'll be the case. And then after we've done that, we've demonstrated to Iran that we're isolating them. We've demonstrated to our allies that we stand by them and we thank them. We're demonstrating to Israel that they are indeed our lasting and most significant ally in the region. We then go to the Palestinians and to the Iranians and we say, here are the following 10 things that you need to do if you ever want to come to the table. If you do these things, then fantastic. Our arms are wide open. We're prepared to welcome you into the community of nations. If you do not do these things, just understand that we don't do things halfway. You will be treated as our adversary, and we will treat you as such. And just lay out an incredibly clear President Trump is uniquely capable of doing the difference in between being an ally of the United States of America versus being an adversary of the United States of America, and let those countries choose what they want to do. And you can accomplish all of that in the first 3 or 4 days. And I'm positive that within the first year of the Trump administration, you'll see the Abraham Accord circle of peace more than double from 5 countries to at least 10 countries. I think that you will see meaningful changes within Palestinian behavior, and you'll see an opportunity to hopefully rebuild Gaza in a place where it is not the thorn in the side of peace in the region, but rather it could be the example of what regional integration in the region should look like. And all of that is accomplishable with somebody who's got the vision, the foresight, but most importantly, the strength and the fortitude of a president like President.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just listened to Aryeh Lightstone, author of Let My People Know, the incredible story of the Middle East peace and what lies ahead. Aryeh is one of the architects of the Abraham Accords. Aryeh Lightstone, thank you for your time.
Strategic Wisdom with Andrew Jose is an initiative of Andrew Jose Media. The views expressed by guests on this show do not necessarily represent the official positions and opinions of Andrew Jose, Andrew Jose Media, and Strategic Wisdom.
Thank you for listening to Strategic Wisdom. Be sure to follow and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you are using to listen to this show in order to not miss out any future interviews and conversations that Andrew Jose will bring to you on this podcast. We're streaming on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Yandex, JioSaavn, Amazon Music, and many other podcast streaming services. Also, be sure to subscribe to Strategic Wisdom on Substack at strategicwisdom.substack.com and to follow Strategic Wisdom on Twitter and Instagram at StratWisdom. Do support our work by buying from our merch store. For more details, visit strategicwisdom.substack.com.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you so much, Ian. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Andrew Jose, signing off.